Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a CIS 141 lesson over material presented in Chapter 8 of your textbook. We're going to be learning about the Internet and the World Wide Web. Let's get started. Alright, here's our agenda. These are the things that we would like to talk about in this presentation. And before I get too far into this presentation, let me just show you something as I'm going to X out of the presentation mode. These slides are available for you on Blackboard, and you'll see I'm going to show the note page here. Some of these slides have a bunch of really detailed notes, and if you'd like to download the presentation from Blackboard, print out note pages or a handout and then take notes on that, you'll feel welcome to do that. But this is a file that's on Blackboard for you to use if you'd like to. Okay, so we're going to begin the presentation by basically learning about the Internet and then moving to the World Wide Web. The Internet is a collection of computer networks. In Chapter 7 of our book, when we covered that, you guys learned about what a computer network is. You learned about computer devices that help put those networks in place, how they function. The Internet is just basically this collection of networks, and so the picture that you saw right there is just this topology picture. You'll recall we talked about network topologies in Chapter 7. If you made a visualization or visualized how all these different networks connect to one another, that's sort of what it would look like. And you'll see it's round because we've got the globe here. You've got like little networks connected to other networks, and so this little spider web, if you will, of all these different networks make up this what we call the Internet. Before we get into the how exactly does it work, I'd like to just point out that this technology, the Internet, has been exceedingly influential in today's culture as well as economy, and I'd like to show you some pictures just to kind of point that out. Take a look at that, if you would, and what do you think that is? If we were in a classroom setting, people would raise their hands and they'd say, "Oh, it's a farmer, and he's working in his fields. He has his laptop out there, and he's trying to check on what's the weather going to be. Is it going to rain? He's checking to see how much pH is supposed to be in a fertilizer mix. He's checking to see how to fix a tractor tire because some of his equipment just broke. All the different things you might possibly need to know when you're working in the field, but you may not know right off the top of your head. You could get on a computing device like a laptop and figure that out. And how is this guy connected to the Internet? Well, he could be using one of those personal area networks that you learned about back in Chapter 7, or he could have a cellular card in this thing, connecting him through like 3G or 4G. A variety of different ways that he could be connecting to the Internet. But the point is, even though this guy's a farmer, he works with his hands, he's out in the field, he's growing food for people to eat, he still uses Internet technology, World Wide Web documents, to do his job. Likewise, we have a lady here working on a boat, and obviously she's at a coastal area. She's right there with the boat in the water. She might be some sort of marine biologist or some sort of researcher that's just gone out and done coral reef stuff. So she's looking maybe at different fish populations or water levels or the salinity of the water, or who knows what. But this lady, just like the guy in the preceding picture, she's using a computing device, in this case a laptop, and again it could be connected through one of those personal area networks or maybe Wi-Fi. She might be close enough to a dock building that has a Wi-Fi connection. She could use that. But she's getting some sort of information to help her do her job, or maybe she's sending reports and, hey, we just did a bunch of checks, and this and this happened while we were checking areas around here, and she could be doing that kind of communication. But this is a lady doing that sort of work. And then lastly, we've got this guy up at the top or the bottom of the world, and even in an Arctic environment, this sort of technology can be helpful. He could be checking, lots of similar things as the others, weather or pulling in mechanical drawings. Maybe they have a piece of equipment that broke. Unfortunately for this guy, like you can see his mittens right there, he's having to take those off so he can type. But even in really remote areas, you've got people using networking, specifically internet and World Wide Web technologies to do their work. And so it's been a really influential and important technology, and it's really changed how we go about our daily lives, especially in the developed world. Okay, well, let's look at where this whole thing came from. Here's a timeline, and I'll try and present this to you very quickly, but basically the Department of Defense during the late 1960s and during the 1970s was looking for something called a packet switching network. And you need to remember, again in context here, in the late 1960s and the 70s and even up into the 80s, the United States' big foe was Russia, and we were afraid that there was going to be a nuclear war between them and us at some point. And so what the military wanted was they wanted some sort of computer network in place that would be able to survive that sort of catastrophe. And so there's an organization within the Department of Defense called the Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's ARPA. And what ARPA was tasked with was figuring out how to, is a packet switching network possible, and if so, how do you build it? So in 1969, they basically were, a guy that worked there said, let's spend $1 million to figure this out. And so they put out what's called a request for proposal, an RFP, and they sent that out to a bunch of technology firms, and the RFP was received, and some people acted on it and some people didn't, but basically they were successful, and this project resulted in something called ARPANET, the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. And so ARPANET, it was a computer network that connected 4 different college campuses. You had 3 in California and 1 in Nevada, and these 4 campuses could send information to one another using packet switching, and you're going to see what packet switching looks like in just a minute. Over time, others saw how beneficial it was for this to use this packet switching technology, and they jumped on board as well. And so that's where you started to see this interconnection of all these existing networks. I'm going to show you a picture of that in just a moment. Okay, and so here is my picture to show you that, like the other networks getting on board here. This timeline right here, basically going across the center here, like 1968 up through the 80s and so on. You have ARPANET, which is created, TCP/IP, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, and then these other networks like MILNET and NSI and so on. And these other networks wanted to interact with one another, and so in order for that to happen, those other networks had to speak a similar language they had to be able to speak the same language as ARPANET was speaking. And so everybody started to use this language called TCP/IP, or this protocol TCP/IP, and we'll talk about that at length in just a moment here. But that's where the internet came from. Is first the Department of Defense put ARPANET together, and once ARPANET was successful, others wanted to join in and be participants in this network, and so all these other existing networks started to be connected to one another, and that happened through the use of this common language or common protocol. Okay, and so let me introduce another term to you. That's something called the backbone. As you watch the news, as you read in your textbook, as you read about this kind of technology, you'll see the internet backbone mentioned, and it's just basically a bunch of cables and fiber optic devices and things that allow different networks to talk to one another. And what we'd like to point out to you is that basically none of this, there's no one company that owns all of this. It's one of the strengths of the internet, is basically there are many different owners of different parts, and they allow everybody else to use their stuff in return for them to being able to use other people's stuff. And as a result of that, we have this global interconnected bunch of networks. And so why is that a strength? Well, it's a strength because you basically get to use other people's stuff for free. And it's also a strength because if any one of those people decides to quit, like you'll see here with the network backbone, AT&T is, they own like 10% of it. Well, if they just say, you know what, forget it, I'm taking my ball and I'm going home, I quit, and they get out of they don't want to use the internet backbone or let people use their stuff anymore, where there's still 90% of the backbone there, and the rest of the internet community is going to be able to function. Now with really big ones like with Verizon, like where they're at 28%, if they got out, that would really affect things. But this is a neat facet of the internet community. Nobody owns it, and so as a result of that, it's kind of like the Wild West, and it's hard to pin down rules and things like that. But you can do a lot of there's a lot of freedom to do what you want on the internet because nobody owns it. Okay, let me show you one last picture of this backbone, but the main reason I want to show this to you is just to bring home that point I made about packet switching a second ago. This is just a different graphical look of all the components of the backbone in the United States, in the continental United States. Then you have Alaska and Hawaii out here and how they're connected as well. But think back to that. I was talking about the 1969, the ARPANET being built. Think about like if you had a naval station down here in Florida and is trying to send information to an Army Ranger Battalion over here in Washington State. Again, in the 60s and the 70s, we were afraid that the Russians were going to send over nuclear warheads that would just decimate whole entire regions of the country. So, as a message tries to travel, from Florida through these backbone lines to Washington State, once it gets to say Kansas, at this point, let's say the Russians have sent over and blown up parts of Kansas. Well, the message gets to here, and with a packet switching network, the routers basically figure out, oh, our message is not getting through Kansas. Let's instead send it through Texas and California, and the message still gets there. And so that's why the DoD, the Department of Defense, wanted a packet switching network, and that's why they put the $1 million up in that RFP, and that's what they got. So now let's look at, I've mentioned protocols several times, and so let's look at protocols. These are things that you're familiar with just in life. Protocols are just simply rules, and there are lots of different protocols that you deal with every day. For example, if you're a military person and there's a person that, if you're walking outside and you walk by somebody of a higher rank, what does one person do to greet the other person? Well, and if we were in a classroom, they would salute. Yeah, you salute. You pop a salute to the higher ranking person. They salute back. It's just a courtesy. It's a protocol. In diplomatic situations, let's say you're the United States envoy to the Czech Republic, and there's some big formal dinner going on. If you're invited to this big formal dinner and you're a lady, what would you wear to this dinner? Well, you're probably not going to wear sweatpants, right? You're going to go in a formal gown or something that's very nice. Gentlemen would not show up in workout shorts and a sweaty t-shirt. They'd show up in a suit or a tuxedo or something nice. That's just the protocol, the rule for that diplomatic situation. If you're in college and you meet somebody, you like them a lot, you start to date them, and you decide, I really like this person, I think I might want to spend the rest of my life with this person. What might you do? What might be one of the things you'd do to incorporate this person into your life? Well, you might take them home to meet your mom and dad, or meet your friends, or meet your brothers or sisters, because you like this new person, and you like these old people because that they're your family, and you want them to meet each other, and hopefully they like each other. But that's a dating protocol. It's just a rule that governs our behavior. That's just something we do. With computers and networks, we also have protocols, and this protocol that we use for the internet is called TCP/IP. It's actually two different protocols squished together. We treat it as one. It's Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol, and this TCP/IP specifies how computers or how networks are going to talk to each other. That's what it does. And because of TCP/IP, all those different networks, like ARPANET and MILNET and NSFNet and all these other networks, were able to start speaking to one another. Because one of the really cool analogies I've heard to describe this is basically there was a phone system in place. These networks could contact one another, but it'd be like if you called Paris, France on your cell phone, and you have a perfect connection to talk to somebody in Paris, France, but you don't speak French. I mean, you guys can sit there and go blah 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 blah, blah, and say things to each other, but you're not going to understand one another. With TCP/IP in place, these networks could contact each other and then speak the same language, and so that's what was going on. Now, let me give you some information about TCP/IP. This is something I want you to know. It essentially has two big ideas, and that first big idea is that every computer or every device on the network has its own unique address. And the other big idea is that when you send data over the network, you don't send it as one big chunk. You break it down into small chunks called packets, and those packets are then routed through devices called routers to the destination. So those are the two big ideas. Let's break these down. Let's look at the first big idea in a little bit of detail here. You know what an IP address is. In the very first chapter of our textbook, I talked to you about what is an IP address, what does it look like. It's the four numbers separated by dots, and the numbers can be anywhere from 0 to 255. And this unique address identifies your computer on a network. You and I, as human beings, have a much easier time working with names, and so we have these what we call domain names, like wku.edu or espn.com, and we use those names through something called the domain name system, the DNS. The domain name system basically resolves a domain name to its actual IP address. And so when we get on a computer and open up a browser, we type in msn.com or foxnews.com or cnn.com, and then through the DNS, the domain name system, that domain name gets resolved to the correct IP address so that the web server at that address can then serve the web page that you've requested to your computer. It's much like a phone book. That's what the domain name system is like. It's like a phone book, and those domain names are used not just in our web pages, but also in our email addresses. So, for example, you have like jim.lindsay@wku.edu as my email address, and that's using the domain name as part of the email address. In addition to, if you wanted to look up the class schedule for classes at WKU for the fall or the spring, you'd go to wku.edu and then get into TopNet, right? So that domain name, it's used in a variety of ways, but it's through the domain name system. Those domain names are being resolved back to IP addresses, which are, that's big idea number one for TCP/IP, is that every device on the network has its own unique address. Now, the next big idea is that we send our data in little chunks, in these packets, to their destination. And let me show you a graphic. And you have these slides. You can get these slides from Blackboard. and print these out. Let me show you a picture which is going to sort of show you what's described here in text. You have a 5-packet message which is being sent over a network here, and the sender is on the left, the receiver is on the right, and you'll see that the message, each chunk of the message, some of it's being sent high, some of it's being sent low, some of it's going right through the center, but the receiver gets all the chunks of the message and puts it back together. And this happens with our emails, this happens when you request a web page, this happens when you send text messages. I mean, it happens so fast we don't pay attention to it, but our devices are sending and receiving data in little chunks called packets. And this is basically, that big idea number 2 about TCP/IP. All right, so we're doing well. Couple more notes, or basically one more note on the internet stuff here, and that's basically that there is an international body called ICANN. It's the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. This is a global entity. It's like a UN kind of thing that they are responsible for managing the domain name system. And registrars, companies that basically sell domain names, they all report to and are working under the umbrella of the authority of ICANN. I'm going to show you that in just a minute when we get to the domain section, and I show you how to buy a domain name. Somebody has to be keeping track of all these domain names, because if not, then you could end up with 2 Pepsi.coms or 2 WKU.edus, and that would be confusing. There can only be one, right? And so ICANN is that body which governs the assignment of those names, and then it's assigned names and numbers, and they're also responsible for keeping track of like the IP addresses and who has those, because the names get resolved into the IP address, right? So the names and numbers, that's what ICANN's job is. Then we've already mentioned and talked about this second point, like nobody owns the internet. So that all the different components that make it up are owned by a variety of entities, and as a result of that, there's a lot of freedom with it, but that also, it's not all good. I mean, if one person owned it, then we could just, very quickly make changes to how things get done. But because it's a whole bunch of, willing participants, you have to basically find some consensus if you want to change things. And so, people don't always know that, but nobody owns the internet. So that's the internet information. Our next big topic is basically the World Wide Web, and it's different. And the World Wide Web is a collection of basically of this stuff that you'd want to look at with your browser. It's songs, it's web pages, it's pictures, it's videos, and it's much newer than the internet. The internet is the infrastructure that's been in place since 1969 with that creation of ARPANET. The World Wide Web, or the web, is just one service that you can get that's available through the internet. There's a bunch of other services like email. You have several listed on the slide in front of you, like teleconferencing, voice over IP, file transfer protocol. These are different things that you can use the internet so you can accomplish things like sending messages to one another and talking to several people at once through your Skype agents and stuff like that. So the World Wide Web is just one service that came about in about 1991. We're going to look at the guy who did that in just a second, but and I alluded to him in an earlier lesson, a guy named Linus Torvalds, and he was a college student. I'm sorry, not Linus, excuse me, Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee is an English guy. He was working at a nuclear research facility called CERN, and basically the reason he did all this was that he wanted to, let me pop over to a different slide so you can get some details on this. Here's kind of the timeline. The internet's created in about 1969. The World Wide Web wasn't created until 1993. Publicly available. I think in 91 it was created for private use. And the internet is this framework that supports all those different applications, and the web is just one of those. But here's that timeline. So in 1990, Tim Berners-Lee, this English guy working at this research facility, comes up with this idea for web pages, and the reason he wanted it was because at this research facility there were all sorts of really great documents that he wanted to connect together, and there was no way to do that. They had file servers and they had a computer network in place, and the internet, and they were using the internet already, so he could basically send documents to people and things like that. But once you had one document open, you couldn't click on something and have it open up another document, and that's what he wanted. And what do we call that when you can click on one thing and it opens something else? Well, we call that a hyperlink, right? So Tim Berners-Lee wanted hyperlinks, and he wanted it so badly that he invented it. He came up with this hypertext markup language, and he also came up with this new protocol called HTTP, which we'll look at in just a minute. It's the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And so with the creation of HTML and HTTP, Tim Berners-Lee basically created this World Wide Web. And we love it. I mean, people love using the internet to connect to web pages. I mean, it's been phenomenally successful. And so initially, this this World Wide Web was all text based. And yeah, you could click on stuff, but basically it was all text based. It wasn't pretty. The pretty part of it came later, down here, where you've got this University of Illinois guy, this Mark Andreessen guy that we're going to be learning about. This creation of this Mosaic web browser is what made the pretty version of the internet, a pretty version of the World Wide Web, really, really popular. And so this is where it all came from, right here, from Tim Berners-Lee inventing it because he wanted hyperlinks, and then a little bit later, again, a college student, Mark Andreessen at the University of Illinois. The guy was making minimum wage. He's working at night in a computer center as a student, and he and his friends came up with the code for the first graphical browser, and then from there it took off like crazy. So I'd like for you to meet him, Mark Andreessen, actually hear from him. But before I do, let me just point this out to you. HTTP, this Hypertext Transfer Protocol that Tim Berners-Lee invented, basically it has, we said that there were two big ideas with TCP/IP, and the big idea with HTTP is that there's a client and a server, and your client is going to use a web browser, and that's going to be a program that you guys use all the time. Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari. You use that web browser, and the client requests a page or a resource from a web server, and it serves up that component to you. So we talked about client server architectures. This is something running off of a client server architecture when you're surfing for web pages, because HTTP has to reach out to somebody that's going to provide it with that resource. So let's meet Mark Andreessen. These are the things I'd like for you to be able to answer after you watch this video. So here's a video. There's a link to it right there. There's a link to it on the Blackboard site. This video, I want you to watch about 6 minutes. Start watching at about the 3-minute and 13-second mark and watch that. But based on what you see there, I'd like for you to be able to answer these questions right here. Let me give you just a little bit of background as you get into this. You're going to see some venture capitalists. You're going to see, if you've ever watched Shark Tank, and you when you watch Shark Tank, there's like Mark Cuban and the guy from Fubu, and there's usually a lady on there, and there's a really mean guy, and you know, people with ideas come to these venture capitalists and they say, hey, I want to take my new widget and I want to you know, sell it and make a whole bunch of money. If you'll give me $100,000, I'll give you a 30% stake in my company, blah blah blah. That's what a venture capitalist does. It's somebody that's earned enough money that they can invest in other people's ideas for a stake, and they get something out of it. You're going to meet this dude. I'm drawing a blank right now. That he's just in the movie that you're about to watch. He's the dude with the huge glasses. His name is John, I think, and basically his venture capitalist firm met Mark and another guy named Jim Clark that basically came up with this graphical browser, and they formed a company called Netscape. And so as you watch this, just realize that their success was just amazing. They had tremendous success. And then what happened after that, it's not really spelled out super well in the video because it's just, you know, you're watching a 6-minute clip. But Microsoft came back with just a very tenacious strategy. When they came out with Windows 98, they rolled the Windows 98 Internet Explorer browser into the operating system, and they gave it to people for free. And prior to this, when people were getting this Netscape browser and other browsers, they were having to pay like $30 each for them. And so you know, all these different copies of all these installations that are going to be talked about in this video, people are paying like $30 each for those, and that's why these guys were making so much money. So what Microsoft did was they came in and with the Windows 98 rollout, and they just said, hey, you know what, you can have it for free. And so at that point, you know, personal computers cost a lot of money. You're spending like $2,000, $2,500 on a computer. You know, are you going to spend another $30 for an extra browser? Probably not, because there's one that came with it. And they essentially just killed Netscape. They completely killed Netscape, and it was they got sued for it, for basically having anti-competitive practices, and they eventually settled out of court. But it took so long for that to happen that they completely drove Netscape out of business. And that's another example for you where Microsoft, I mean, you know, they do some things that are kind of you look at it and go, man, is that ethical? Is that right? You know, I can't answer that for you, but you know, is that playing dirty? I don't know, but they won. And so as you're figuring out who you want to be as a business person, you can look at this interaction between Microsoft and Netscape, and how Microsoft basically won that fight, and figure out how you might have gone about that. So watch this video. Again, it's available at that link right there, or you can get it from the Blackboard site, but watch it from 3:13 until the end, and I'll see you back here in a moment. Okay, I hope you watched that. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, that guy was basically, he's your age, man. He's a 22-year-old dude, 21-year-old guy that was really smart, came up with a great idea. And if you have some ideas, I encourage you to pursue them. You're at a point in your life where you can do that, and you're able to work really long hours, and if you fail, you still have enough time to kind of recuperate from it pretty gracefully. So I hope you enjoyed that. My next business lesson question for you has to do with something called domain names, and what I'd like for you to do as a graduate of my courses, I think it's imperative that you come out knowing how to buy a domain name. This is the kind of stuff that I wish people would have told me in my classes, and so when I was a college student, and just unfortunately that wasn't something that a lot of people knew, and they couldn't share it. So let me show you how to do this. I'm going to jump over to the website GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy is a registrar, just like the WKU registrar offices who you guys go through to register for classes. And so same kind of deal. When you want a domain name or you want hosting, these are the kind of companies that you would go through. And there are many, many, many registrars. GoDaddy is just one of them. I've used GoDaddy for a really long time. I think they provide really good service. I think their prices are fair, and I think that if you need help, you can reach out to them and they'll help you in a very satisfactory way. So if you're looking for a domain name and you don't want to use GoDaddy, fine, that's great. I just show you GoDaddy because this is who I've used the most. So let me open up a browser and I'll show you how you do this. Okay, I'm using Firefox as my browser. You could use any browser for this, it wouldn't matter. But I'm at the GoDaddy site. It's GODADDY.com. They advertise a lot. They sponsored like Danica Patrick with NASCAR. I'm sure you've seen their commercials. Some of their commercials are pretty racy and kind of sleazy. Sometimes their website is also kind of skanky in that regard. So fortunately, right now it's not. As you browse through it, and it changes a lot. This is a lot like the Dell website. What you see today may be completely different in just 2 or 3 days or a week, but the basic functions are still going to be here. So let me show you how to buy a domain name. First thing, you could type in a domain name right here, but I'm going to go to where it says all products, domains, websites, blah blah blah. I'm going to go with domains. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to say find a domain, and take me to this page where I can do a search. And I'm just going to type in some random words here. I'm going to go with couch and pen and table. So couch, pen, table. Let's see if let me close that little box right there. See if that's a domain name I could get. And hooray, I can get couchpentable.com, and it's only going to cost me $9.99 per year to get that, and that's some kind of promotional rate. You'll see there's an asterisk next to it. I could get couchpentable.net, Oregon.info with it for an additional $17 per year, and what you're paying for is the right to use this name for a period of time. You're not buying the name. You're just buying the right to use this name for a specific period of time, and that's the same with any registrar. And this registrar, GoDaddy.com, and all other registrars, whether you're using like Network Solutions or Kentucky Premier Net or whoever you're going with, they all report back to ICANN through that domain name system. All right, and so when I did that search right there, basically was checking with the domain name system, which is managed by ICANN, to verify that nobody else has Couch Pen Table. And so as I scroll down this page right here, it shows me different top level domains like info, org, co, us, .net that are also available, and the prices for those. And you'll see that some are cheaper than others, some are on sale. The one that's usually the most expensive is the .com. In this case, couchtables.com. It looks like it's somebody already has it, so it has a real expensive price of $2,900. So whoever owns couchtables.com would be willing to sell it to me for $2,900. It's at auction at this point. So if you see some really crazy amount, let's say you did a search for your name. Let's say your name happens to be the same as a celebrity. Let's say you're Chris Rock. That's your name. If we went chrisrock.com, guess what? Probably Chris Rock, the celebrity, already has that, I think. And so you're going to have to pay a whole lot of money to Chris Rock in order to get that, if he's willing to sell it at all. And that's why you might see some crazy amount of money listed, like this, got this $2,900 right here. But if it is available, you just select the ones you want, and then it puts them in your shopping cart. Then you go to checkout, and you basically pay GoDaddy for that period of time that you want to get your name. The smallest amount of time you can purchase, I believe, is about a year. Most people will get stuff in chunks like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, because it's cheaper if you buy it for that longer period of time. Also, this stuff usually ties into a credit card, and so there's like an auto renew, which is part of it, and I highly encourage you to do that. Have it automatically renew with your credit card, because if you forget, let's say you bought this couchpentable.com, you build up a really good business, and then it gets to time to renew it and you forget, and you're not using the auto renew, whoever else happens to stumble upon it during that period of time that you've forgotten, they can buy it, and because you didn't renew it, you're out of luck. And so you've spent all this time, all this money, all this energy to build up this brand for couchpentable.com. It's successful, people recognize it, they go to it to buy stuff, and all of a sudden there's this new owner, but nobody knows that because they're just going through their browsers. And so use that auto renew, it's really worth the time. Now there's also something called hosting, and you look up here, it says hosting and SSL. Hosting, click on that. Hosting is just basically getting space on their web server to store your web pages, and you need it. You have to have it. You can't. Let me see if I can find the price here for. I'll be right back. Okay, I went ahead and clicked on hosting, and then web hosting on sale to get this chart that you see right here. Once you have a domain name, if you don't have anywhere to store your pages, it doesn't do you any good, and so you have to have the domain name and hosting. You have to have both. Now, hosting is really inexpensive. You'll see, for example, with this economy plan, you're spending like $5 a month, and that's per month. And so let's say it's about $60 per year for your web hosting, and then another 10 or 15 for your domain name. So like $75 you can be online with a name, with a website, and these limits down here basically have 100 gigabytes of storage and email addresses and this sort of stuff. These usually are sufficient for your small businesses that are just going to basically be presenting information and not trying to sell stuff online. If you needed to actually sell things, you'd want to go with one of these more expensive plans where you had like secure connections and ways to collect credit card information and stuff like that. But if you're just simply trying to get your information about your company out on the internet, this is perfect. So for the $60 for the hosting, $10-15 for your name, you're good to go, and you're out there on the internet. All you need is a credit card to get it set up. Okay, hopefully that's some information that if you didn't have that before, I hope you'll feel comfortable and try that out. And those questions right there, those are things I hope you can now answer based on what you've just seen and heard. And we are just about done. There's just a couple more things we want to talk about from your textbook. It talks about different ways to connect to the internet, and when you get your internet service through an internet service provider, you're going to connect in a variety of fashions. You could use, for example, like cable or DSL or satellite. That's what most of us are going to use. And this chart lists for you the different speeds that you'll get using those different types of connections. And your textbook talks about the details of those. You've got some estimations on prices over here. Our book's not completely up to date because we're trying to stay an edition back to keep the money down. So the rates here aren't necessarily exactly accurate, but you can get a good idea about how they compare to one another. But most of us at our homes are going to have, if we're having broadband, we're going to have like cable, DSL, or satellite. I believe up in Owensboro they have a pretty good fixed wireless plan up there. So you might, and we were talking about WiMAX and like in Chapter 7, and using WiMAX to connect to like entire metropolitan areas. So this fixed wireless is getting more common, but most people are still using some sort of connection like this. That broadband over fiber we were talking about, that fiber optic connection, it's super fast, and it's also expensive. It talks about that, and then you've got like using your cellular phone to connect with 4G or 3G, and that's pretty expensive, man, because you have like the caps on how much data you can get. But you may have to do that depending on where you live. Kentucky has lots of areas where this traditional stuff of cable and DSL, you just can't get that for your internet connection. You either have to go satellite or use something like cellular like this. And so these different ways to connect to the internet are described in your text. Check those out. And to conclude this chapter, it gets into some censorship and privacy issues, and with censorship, essentially what they're talking about, as you go around the world, there are different areas where some things are allowed and some are not allowed. You've got the whole Big Brother sort of thing going on. In China, for example, you may not be able to get web pages that you can get in the United States because somebody could say something derogatory about the government, or you may be able to get websites in one country that you cannot get in the United States because we have certain laws in place about child pornography and stuff like that they may not have in those other places. And so it's depending on where you go, the ruling government can have an impact upon what you actually can access. That's nothing new. It's always been with print media and TV media. That's something that's been around a long time, but we see that in the internet and World Wide Web world as well. I think something that you can control is when it gets into like web browsing privacy, and it talks about cookies and spyware and adware. These are things I can speak to you about. I'll keep this really short, but basically cookies are text files, and they're not bad. A cookie is essentially something that identifies your computer to a web server, and they're actually really helpful. So let's say you bought books at Amazon.com, and you like Tom Clancy, okay? And so he's an author, and so the next time you go back to Amazon.com, they'll say, "Hey, welcome back, Jim. You might like these books too," and it could have stuff by Clive Cussler, it could have stuff by W.E.B. Griffin or other authors kind of like Tom Clancy, and it's able to do that based on cookies. Or if you go and you buy music, if you like Journey, then you might also like these other classic rock bands, or if you like Bruno Mars, you might like these other singers, and so cookies just basically identify your computer to a web server. But there's a kind of cookie, basically a tracking cookie or a third-party cookie, which they're made by marketing companies. And in that case, what happens is a company hires somebody else to make their cookie for them. And so as with this third-party cookie, what happens is, let's say the XYZ company is the third party that does it for Hertz Rent-A-Car and Disney World and Chili's restaurants. And so if that third party company is making the cookies for all three of those entities, they can start to build up sort of a dossier or a profile about you, because they can see that you're not only shopping at Chili's to get food, but you're also renting a car and you're going to Disney World. So they can probably figure out, oh, well, by the way, you're probably in Orlando because you're at Disney World right now, and so we're going to send you a bunch of advertisements for all of our customers that we do stuff for in the Orlando area. And so you start getting inundated with emails and notifications about stuff. You're like, man, this is creepy. Why am I getting all this stuff? Who knows I'm in Orlando? I'm not telling anybody. Well, it's because of the cookies from the third-party tracking cookie that's able to figure out who you are and what you're doing. That creeps some people out. One of the ways you can really basically manage that is through that CCleaner program that we talked about in a preceding lesson. Use CCleaner to clean out all those temp files on a regular basis, and it kills that stuff. You need cookies in your browser to basically be able to do stuff fun and functioning. If you want to have a good time or enjoyable experience on the internet, you need cookies to be enabled. And so just what my advice to you would be basically get CCleaner and run CCleaner on a regular basis, and let it go ahead and clear that stuff out when you're done with your browsing. So that's what cookies are. Spyware and adware, basically, it's software which looks at what web pages you visited, and then tries to figure out ways to, with adware especially, based on websites you visited, how to advertise stuff to you, because they're trying to market products and services and websites for other people, and they're trying to, based on your past behavior, trying to send you stuff that's going to get you to spend more money. Spyware can be more malicious than that. With spyware, somebody could actually be trying to get do identity theft and steal your information. So, but CCleaner can get rid of most, all those temp files for you. So, get CCleaner, run it on a regular basis. You're probably going to be in good shape. Very last point: email is not private, and if there's anything that you want to that you wouldn't want to say to somebody, just don't send email. Don't put private stuff, confidential stuff, sensitive stuff in emails, because even if you send it from yourself to somebody you trust, well, guess what? They might have an assistant who reads their email for them, and then they could forward that email to somebody else, and then it's going to be all over the place. I've got this Rockwell. You've probably heard that 1980 song. I always feel like somebody's watching me. Somebody's watching you with email. It's not private, and if there's anything that's sensitive or of a personnel matter, or like if you're talking about disciplinary actions and stuff like that with employees, it's just, if you want to send an email, say you need to call me, you need to come see me, and leave it at that, and then do the actual disciplinary stuff or the counseling stuff in person or on the phone. On the phone's even better than email. So that's it. That's our chapter. It's a lot. I certainly appreciate your time and attention. It's a long lesson. Thank you. Hopefully it was informative, and have a good day.